Thanks so much. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation with Shantanu and Isabel, and then with the larger audience. So let me go ahead and read the talk. So the title of the talk is Meritocracy and Democracy, the Social Life of Caste in India. In India today, the term merit is a ubiquitous one that generates a lot of political heat. Over the post-independence period, merit has come to reference forms of distinction that have a much longer social life. And while there are various social distinctions that are at stake in public debates around who does or does not have merit, the most politically charged point of reference is caste. The relationship between caste and merit is widely debated, but nowhere more vocally than in engineering education. Within the world of Indian engineering education, the institutions seen as the most meritocratic are the Indian Institutes of Technology, or IITs, which are the focus of my research. Unlike the vast majority of educational institutions that are overseen by regional governments, the IITs are directly administered and financed by the Indian federal government, which gives them far greater autonomy in institutional functioning, faculty hiring, and curricular development. Their autonomy was guaranteed in other ways as well. In the name of ensuring merit as the only basis for admission, they were initially exempted from caste-based affirmative action. Soon after their founding, the IITs became stepping stones to transnational mobility, especially to the United States. From the 1970s, the professional successes of IIT alumni in both India and the US generated a mad rush to gain admission and spawned a massive coaching industry to train students in entrance exam preparation. Within Indian public discourse, the IITian is seen as an exemplar of intellectual merit, someone naturally gifted in technical knowledge. What gets occluded in such assessments are the historical inheritances that have enabled admission to the IITs. The majority of IITians come from upper caste families of bureaucrats and academics, where capital has long been held in education. While arguably from middle class backgrounds, the value of their accumulated caste capital has spiked due to the reorganization of late 20th and early 21st century capitalism around the knowledge economy. At the same time, the role of caste and state in producing IITians has been obscured in favor of their portrayal as uniquely meritorious individuals. The IIT story provokes some important questions. How does privilege become merit? How does the naturalization of the IITians' merit inform understandings of caste difference? And what does this mean for the possibilities and limits of democratic transformation in India? One of my main aims in this work was to interrogate the widespread assumption that caste is a more salient basis of social distinction and self-definition for lower than for upper castes. More specifically, upper caste urban professionals are thought to have transcended caste to adopt more modern forms of identification. At the same time, professional classes and institutional spaces like the IITs continue to be majority upper caste in composition. Moreover, attempts at opening up these spaces to lower castes are consistently met with fervent opposition, not in the name of caste, but in the name of preserving merit. Despite continuing caste stratification and the claims to merit by upper castes, there's little scholarship that brings these issues together. And this is where I see my work coming in. I look at the role of engineering education and the IITs in particular in producing claims to merit as expressions of upper casteness. To get at the relationship between caste and merit, I build on the work of sociologist Satish Deshpande on how upper castes are rendered casteless in India. The story of how upper castes transformed their caste capital into modern capital is not well known, he says, because it runs with the grain of the dominant common sense. By contrast, the political use of caste by lower castes is a recurrent, publicly debated theme. The result of this asymmetry, Deshpande maintains, is that upper castes are naturalized as the inheritors of modernity, while lower castes are hyper-visible as the illegitimate purveyors of caste. For upper caste, he concludes, caste, quote, has already yielded all that it can and represents a ladder that can now be safely kicked away. Having encashed its traditional caste capital and converted it into modern forms of capital like property, higher educational credentials, and strongholds in lucrative professions, this section believes itself to be casteless today, unquote. My work builds on Deshpande's but adds a key component, and this is the relationship between subaltern assertion, and capital accumulation. Strategies of upper caste capital accumulation must be understood, I argue, in relation to oppositional politics, so that we can see how caste emerges out of longer historical dynamics and continues to be reconfigured in the context of democratic politics. But it's also to make the larger point that historical privilege doesn't simply reproduce itself. The proliferation of rights politics and the entry of new groups into spaces previously monopolized by upper castes have posed real challenges to caste hierarchies. The claim to merit is one strategy aimed at stabilizing the flux of political life in order to secure arenas of expertise and accumulation against lower caste advancement. However, even this claim to merit is not a guarantee and has to be continuously recalibrated in the face of new challenges. My work on the tracks such changing expressions of upper casteness. While I consider the IIT system as a whole, my main focus is on IIT Madras in the state of Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is a particularly illuminating context in which to look at the politics of meritocracy because its history of lower caste rights politics has complicated the naturalization of merit and the transformation of upper castes into casteless moderns. Here, merit is understood as a product of historical privilege and not simply of innate ability. In this sense, Tamil Nadu calls into question Deshpande's account of castelessness as a stable structure of upper caste self-definition. Departing from his analysis, I ask how dynamics in Tamil Nadu might inform an analysis of caste more broadly. When are claims to merit made on the basis of castelessness and when on the basis of caste? And how are status and stigma marked in the absence of explicit invocations of caste? So let me now turn to the research. I'll first give you a brief account of the role of caste in colonial technical education, and then turn to IIT Madras and the making of upper casteness through claims to merit. For the post-independence period, I'll look at three phenomena: affirmative action, mass examinations, and diasporic mobility, and use each to show how the contours of upper casteness have shifted in response to new challenges. But first, let's go back to the 19th century. Caste played a critical role in the induction of Indians into formal technical training in the late colonial period. Through the 19th and early 20th centuries, racial barriers to technical education were expressed through a preference for engineers from England. It was only with the rise in nationalist criticism of colonial rule and the expansion of public works that the colonial government began to invest more systematically in formal technical education for Indians. The question of what kind of training this would be and who was best suited for it was hotly debated. From the beginning, we see tensions between two views of engineering. The first expressed an older orientation around engineering as practical learning, unsuited to the classroom. The second, newer view argued for the importance of engineering as formal conceptual education, aligned with the social hierarchies of the colony. While the debate endured into the 20th century, the call to formalize engineering as classroom education ultimately won out. Although technical skill was more clearly evident among lower caste artisans, the emerging consensus over engineering as classroom learning and its connection to the state made literate upper caste the principal targets of this new knowledge. In elevating the classroom as the principal site of engineering knowledge, state planners marginalized those who had technique in favor of those schooled in reading and writing. In many ways, Madras Presidency, the colonial jurisdiction that became the state of Tamil Nadu, was an extreme case of the caste stratification of technical training. Here, the categories of Brahmin and non-Brahmin had become foundational units of administrative sociology through which technical training was implemented. Efforts distinguishing non-Brahmin from Brahmin pursuits strengthened and naturalized the link between caste and technical skill. The effects in the engineering field were clear. As the numbers of Europeans in the Madras engineering services fell, Brahmins were the single largest group to fill the vacuum, despite being barely 3% of the regional population. The correlation between caste and occupation and the overrepresentation of Brahmins in the modern professions became a rallying cry of the Dravidian movement that profoundly reshaped the Tamil political and social milieu. Within the technical sciences, too, its impact was far-reaching. The Southeast was one of the first regions where caste quotas in technical education and employment were implemented. These measures had considerable success at changing the Brahmin dominance of regional engineering education. One of the lasting effects of Dravidianism is a cleavage between Tamil Nadu's other castes and Tamil Brahmins, with caste privilege more closely tied to Brahminness than in many other parts of India. In effect, lower caste rights politics interrupted the translation of caste capital into modern capital by making Brahmins hyper-visible as castes, a move that has been an important catalyst for a more far-reaching politics of meritocracy. An early instance of this is the first post-independence legal challenge to caste quotas. In 1951, two Tamil Brahmin petitioners claimed that their fundamental right to equality and non-discrimination, guaranteed by Article 15(1) of the Constitution, was violated by regional quotas in medical and engineering colleges. The Madras High Court agreed. In a key passage, the judgment stated, quote, if students belonging to a certain community or caste, by reason of their caste discipline, habits, and modes of life, satisfy the prescribed requirements in larger number than others, it is not permissible to shut them out on that score. It would be strange if, in this land of equality and liberty, a class of citizens should be constrained to wear the badge of inferiority because they have a greater aptitude for certain types of education than other classes, unquote. The judgment redefined caste in two ways, from a system of graded inequality into community life, and from a form of historical advantage into collective aptitude. Moreover, it identified the quota itself as the source of discrimination. Deshpande argues that the 1951 verdict offered upper castes a form of agency, quote, based on the universal normative position of castelessness, and authored and disseminated a new kind of common sense, where the very definition of caste was truncated and equated with the lower caste, unquote. This common sense only deepened after the courts shifted in favor of quotas. Those who qualified for quotas were included in the reserved category on the basis of their caste affiliation, whereas those who did not qualify were simply classed under the general category of merit-based admissions. This absenting of caste from the general category has profoundly shaped the debate around educational equality in India. The distinction between the meritorious or casteless on one side and the reserved or caste-based on the other has allowed those who fall within the general category to argue that it's affirmative action and not structural inequality that undermines equal citizenship. However, there's another side to the 1951 judgment that also lives on. And this is the definition of caste as culture, as natural aptitude, and as the very basis of merit. The judgment set the stage for a politics of self-definition through which Tamil Brahmins equated caste belonging with having merit, which they argued was threatened by the very existence of the reserved category. With the expansion of lower caste rights politics across India, this claim to merit as the non-reserved has become a more generalized phenomenon, seen not just in legal challenges to affirmative action, but in collective protests and in more everyday practices. In this sense, caste dynamics in Tamil Nadu set an important precedent for making the general category a putatively democratic norm, whose external limit is lower casteness. Let's now turn to the IITs to look at how the Tamil Brahmin president set the stage for an expanding politics of meritocracy. As I noted, three phenomena have been key to the making of upper casteness at the IITs. The first is affirmative action. It was in the context of Tamil Brahmin legal challenges to quotas that IIT Madras was founded in 1959. As a federal government institution exempt from regional quotas, it was quickly coveted by Tamil Brahmins as a meritocratic space shielded from lower caste claims where talent would find its due. This changed in 1973, when federal quotas for the most disadvantaged castes were extended to the IITs. Although there was opposition from all of the IITs, IIT Madras led the charge in condemning the move as government overreach and a violation of meritocracy. The majority of students at the time were the children of upper caste civil servants with shared family histories of education and employment. Within Tamil Nadu, it's Brahmins who form the core of this class. Unlike their caste compatriots from other parts of India, Tamil Brahmins, as early targets of Dravidianism, responded most defensively by claiming IIT Madras as their own. But IIT Madras was not simply a site for Brahmin caste kinship within a so-called non-Brahmin region. Lower caste thummers who gained admission through the general category were also assumed to be Brahmin. Gopi, a lower caste alumnus, told me a story that captured this perfectly. He was changing his clothes when his Tamil Brahmin roommate inquired into the whereabouts of his sacred thread. When I told him I don't wear one, Gopi said, he paused and asked, "Doesn't your mother get upset?" It never struck him that I was a lower caste. In fact, I think he still assumes that I'm from a liberal Brahmin family. Gopi's experience speaks not to the castelessness of the IITian, but to the assumption that any Tamil who gets in on merit is by definition Brahmin. Other practices were also assumed to index caste difference. The display of bodily neglect was one. Ratty t-shirts, torn jeans, and flip-flops signaled a Brahmin background where the consumption of knowledge was prized above commodity consumption. By contrast, dressing well was attributed to nouveau riche lower castes who didn't truly value knowledge. These assumptions acquired a disciplining force. Palani, a lower caste student from Chennai, told me how he made a point of switching out his shoes for flip-flops when he came back to campus after weekends at home. It was easier, he said, than standing out. Gopi's misrecognition as Brahmin and Palani's sartorial code switching point to the assumed composition of the general category. While it purportedly marks a form of achievement available to all, assumptions about the ascriptive bases of merit were ever present. Within IIT Madras, to be lower caste was to be non-meritorious. Moreover, non-Brahmin Tamils were forced to erase the complexity of their own history to produce flattened forms of caste difference that aligned with expectations of who did or didn't have merit. How then did this regional dynamic set a precedent for a wider politics of meritocracy? In the 1990s, lower caste rights politics spread to other parts of India, resulting in the emergence of new constituencies and parties. One of the outcomes of this political ferment was the implementation in 1990 and 2006 of new federal quotas for intermediate castes that expanded the reserved category to nearly half the student body of institutions like the IITs. As a result, what had been a regional dialectic of non-Brahmin claims to rights and Brahmin claims to merit expanded nationally. But now when such claims were articulated, they expressed not Brahminness, but a consolidated form of upper casteness. The 1990 quota ignited a firestorm in North India, with upper caste students engaging in street protests and masquerading as vendors, sweepers, and cobblers in a graphic depiction of their future reduction to lower caste labor. Echoing the 1951 judgment, its detractors defined the quota as a violation of the ideal of equality and the reserved as singularly undeserving. The 2006 quota further entrenched the opposition between general and reserved as widely shared categories through which the Indian public understood caste difference. In news articles, films, jokes, and online debates emerged an upside-down world where stigmatization and exclusion were the plight of the general category, and the reserved were illegitimate beneficiaries of state corruption. Unmistakable in such commentary was the outrage at the disruption of a natural order, where upper caste dominance was assumed to be a byproduct of talent and desert. At the IITs, the expanded quota produced a more explicit association between the general category and being upper caste. IIT administrators started admitting lower caste students only through the quota, regardless of their entrance exam marks, trying in effect to make the general category into an upper caste quota. The ramifications have been far-reaching. After 2006, private sector job recruiters have become vigilant about only hiring general category students. Several who got into IIT Madras through the quota recounted their chagrin at being pointedly asked for their admissions rank at the final stage of recruitment. There is thus emerging a two-tier system of employment in which only upper castes are seen as legitimate IITians. Still, this process of caste consolidation has not been smooth. The instability of upper casteness becomes more evident when we consider the second phenomenon shaping dynamics at the IITs, and this is the mass examination. The mass examination is commonly taken as an index of modern meritocracy. Unlike earlier processes of selection that explicitly favored a high-born elite, the mass exam was underwritten by an ideology of middle-class achievement, where labor would find its just rewards. Its scale and finely calibrated set of ranked outcomes stood in for a process of objective evaluation beyond social and political influence. However, this assumption is belied by the structuring force of economic and social relations and by the ideological power of cultural assumptions. As filtering mechanisms, mass examinations typically favor those who come from histories of education and have a facility with this technical instrument. A case in point is the IIT's entrance exam, which represents the fullest realization of India's examination fetish. It's widely perceived as a near perfect measure of merit because the pan-Indian scope of the exam is assumed to filter only the best out of a vast pool of applicants. However, it has not been a democratizing force. As noted earlier, the majority of IITians were children of upper caste civil servants. Their parents, themselves participants in another All India ritual, the Union Public Service Commission exam, made a point of training their children to succeed in intense competitiveness of examination culture. These structural continuities have made caste and class history key to exam success, even as perceptions of such exams as objective filters of individual ability have reinforced an ideology of meritocracy. In this instance as well, a more explicit claim to merit as a caste trait was first expressed by Tamil Brahmins. From the 1940s, Tamil Brahmins reacted to the regional quota system by investing heavily in exam preparation to enter federal government schools, colleges, and bureaucracies, a phenomenon that one Tamil Brahmin IITian referred to as a caste culture of coaching. With the opening of IIT Madras, this caste culture was directed towards a new goal. I heard innumerable stories of mothers burning the midnight oil with their children, coaxing them to do practice tests so they could ace the IIT entrance exam. There's a palpable sense within these accounts of both resentment and intellectual superiority, a combined claim to being a uniquely talented and deserving middle class and a scapegoated caste. In the past 15 years, IIT exam coaching has exploded into a billion-dollar industry. This has shifted the class profile of students at IIT Madras to include a large contingent from rural upper caste families in the neighboring states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Their arrival, however, has not been met with equanimity. In a newspaper interview about the proliferation of coaching classes, a former director of IIT Madras clarified that he was, quote, looking for students with raw intelligence and not those with a mind prepared by coaching class tutors, unquote. This notion of raw intelligence places the ideal IITian outside institutional or even social formation as a naturally talented individual. In conversations with IIT administrators, I heard their concerns that the coaching industry undermined the ability of the exam to test for those who are truly worthy, in the process admitting students through the general category who are not actually gifted. It's clear that this divide between the gifted and the coached is not about who attends coaching classes, since virtually all IITians do. So who then are the coached? When pushed, I heard that they were from rural, non-professional, and non-English speaking backgrounds. They were the ones who attended the so-called coaching factories, where learning was rote, unlike the more boutique conceptual classes attended by the urban middle class. In some ways, it is these students who most destabilize the equation of merit with being upper caste. As noted earlier, the implementation of the 1990 and 2006 quotas has made it even easier to consign all lower caste students to the undeserving reserved category. But these rural students are problematic because they are the wrong kind of upper caste. Their presence compels those from class histories of higher education and professional employment to distinguish themselves, not just from lower castes, but from non-ideal upper castes, in order to claim merit as their exclusive property. That the claim to merit is in fact about property becomes clearer when you consider the final phenomenon, diasporic mobility. Caste inheritances have long been key to mobility. Here too, the Tamil Brahmin story prefigures a more widespread pattern. Over the 20th century, and in the face of lower caste demands for the redistribution of power and resources, Tamil Brahmins used mobility from countryside to city, from public to private sector, and from South India to the north and to other countries as a means to secure their economic and social standing. In Tamil Brahmin narratives, mobility comes across as an expression of cultural genius that across successive generations has allowed them to preserve merit against the odds. The Tamil Brahmin use of mobility anticipated similar trends across India. After independence, diasporic mobility became a key tool for a wide spectrum of upper castes looking to secure the conditions for capital accumulation in the face of lower caste demands for access to public education and state employment. From the 1960s, the US emerged as the favored destination and became the most affluent and highly educated node of the diaspora. Diasporic success has reinforced the link between meritocracy and caste. With geographical distance from challenges to caste entitlement, upper caste achievement abroad appears to be a form of self-made success. Within the US Indian diaspora, IIT alumni have been particularly active in shoring up their status as uniquely meritocratic individuals. After the IT boom of the 1990s, IITians in Silicon Valley began forging a new claim to merit as the basis of achievement. Now, however, it was a form of racial distinction through which they sought to make Indianness synonymous with technical talent and brand IIT highly prized commodity. The early 2000s was a critical time for this project. Various magazines featured articles on the IITs. Forbes did a story titled Indians of Silicon Valley, and Business Week came out with India's Genius Factories. Most important was a 2003 episode of 60 Minutes on the IITs, a carefully curated bit of publicity featuring choice quotes from prominent alumni that made the case for diasporic success as a natural extension of an IIT education. In it, Vinod Khosla, the co-founder of Sun Microsystems, observes that Fortune 500 headhunters favor IITians over almost anybody else. As he put it, quote, "If you're a WASP walking in for a job, you wouldn't have as much pre-assigned credibility as you do if you're an engineer from IIT," unquote. This project of self-racialization has been yoked to the cultivation of entrepreneurship. The Indus Entrepreneurs, an organization started by IIT alumni in Silicon Valley, boasts a membership of over 13,000, and its list of mentors includes the most well-recognized Indian names in the corporate sector. In conversations with senior mentors of the organization, I learned that the entrepreneurial ambitions of younger IITians are actively cultivated. These expressions of transnational institutional kinship have both underwritten the commodity value of an IIT education and enhanced the racial mystique around the IITians' intellect. Together, such media events and institutional mechanisms have elevated the status of the IITs and their diasporic ambassadors. But they've also produced new schisms between diasporic and homeland IITians. It's clear from speaking to Silicon Valley's IITians that they share an imagination of constraint and possibility. As do homeland alumni, they insist that in India, they were limited by a system that fostered mediocrity in the name of democracy, and where the IITs were islands of meritocracy. But there's also something new. In their embrace of entrepreneurial wealth accumulation as the basis of merit, diasporic IITians are increasingly at odds with an older upper caste orientation around academic and professional life. Although most are the children of civil servants and public sector engineers, they have gone from being beneficiaries of the developmental state to its most strident detractors. Their disdain for the Indian public sector now also extends to homeland IITians. As they see it, Indian conditions have forced those who stayed behind to slip into mediocrity, so that only the diasporic IITian truly embodies merit. Many homeland alumni also endorse the diasporic branding project as good for the institutions. As one put it, quote, "The brand is a kind of ISO mark. You're assured of quality, like when you see a car made in Japan, it immediately sells," unquote. However, not everyone echoed these commitments to branding and entrepreneurship. When I asked one homeland alumnus to compare alumni activity in the US and India, he responded without skipping a beat. In USA, it's brand building. Here, it's nation building. As examples of nation builders, he offered a list of alumni, including an Ayurvedic doctor, a minister of environment, and the head of an NGO working in primary education. "These are all IITians who have contributed to the development of the country," he said pointedly, "but all you hear about now is Silicon Valley." Another alumnus who now teaches at IIT Madras confided that what he called the entrepreneurship craze was demoralizing for faculty, whose students were far more interested in attracting the attention of venture capitalists than in learning the curriculum. Now, instead of engineering, he remarked in frustration, all they want to understand is the business of business. Particularly noteworthy was the stance of some Tamil Brahmin alumni who expressed a distaste for the blatant embrace of accumulation, which they felt was more aligned with a mercantile sensibility and a disturbing departure from an older model of ascetic intellectualism that they claimed was a trademark characteristic of IIT Madras. One expressed his disquiet by saying, all these good Brahminical values that, at least in the minds of some people in the South, used to mean that you should be good in academics and intellectual pursuits, that you shouldn't be taken in by these material things. All that has vanished. The invocation of bygone Brahminical values speaks volumes about the continuing transformation of upper casteness. As with the oppositions between the general and reserved and the gifted and coached, new tensions have arisen between intellectual and entrepreneurial conceptions of merit. The diasporic model of merit has not been embraced by all IITians. To their surprise, those who were once emblematic of upper caste meritocracy now find themselves resisting its most recent iteration. To conclude, in post-independence India, new patterns of caste stratification and consolidation have emerged through the very process of democratic change. Tamil Nadu is an important precedent for understanding this process. By throwing into relief caste inheritances as the basis of achievement, Dravidianism forced Tamil Brahmins into a reactive claim to merit as an expression of caste culture. From the 1990s, this dynamic expanded nationally, polarizing consolidated groupings of upper and lower castes. Exam coaching was one spanner in the works that forced a redefinition of merit as both a caste and a class characteristic. And while diasporic mobility has allowed for more unfettered accumulation, homeland IITians now contest the equation of merit with entrepreneurial success. What does this process suggest for our understanding of democracy? For one, the intimacy between caste and merit throws into question the assumption that identitarianism is principally a politics of the marginalized. The leveraging of merit is just one example of an identity politics aimed at shoring up inherited advantages. Second, the shifting meanings of upper casteness and the shifting spaces of accumulation from land to federal government employment, the domestic private sector, and the diaspora show the instability of privilege and the work that it takes to maintain the upper hand. Privilege is often treated as a stable structure with a self-perpetuating logic, to which subalterns respond with dynamic forms of affiliation and maneuver. Analyses of subaltern politics have provoked a reappraisal of democracy to include forms of political agency previously seen as pre-political, non-political, or non-democratic. Despite these ways of rethinking democracy, there's been less effort to understand how the political imaginaries and tactics of the powerful are themselves relationally constituted and subject to recalibration. The story of making merit at the IITs illuminates this broader relational dynamic as an integral part of the democratic process. Thank you.